My dad made me open the same wooden box every year for 15 years. And I had no idea why. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. If someone you loved left you a box and told you to open it only once a year, would you follow the rules? Or would curiosity win? Because this guy followed the rules. For 15 years. And the final note changed everything. I found this story while going through Reddit late one night, and honestly, the ending hit harder than I expected. Here's what happened. My father died when I was 11. Not suddenly. Not unexpectedly. He had been sick for a long time. Long enough for everyone to know what was coming. Long enough for everyone to start pretending it wasn't. I still remember the smell of that hospital room. The constant beeping. The uncomfortable chairs. The fake smiles people wear when they're scared. Back then, I didn't really understand what was happening. I knew Dad was sick. But part of me believed he'd eventually come home. Kids think like that. They believe bad things happen to other families. Not theirs. A week before he passed away, he asked to see me alone. Just me. No doctors. No nurses. No relatives. I remember sitting beside his bed. Trying not to cry. Trying to act brave. Because I thought that's what he wanted. Instead, he smiled. Then pointed toward a small wooden box sitting near the window. It wasn't fancy. Just an old box. Scratches everywhere. The kind of thing you'd find in an attic. He told me to bring it over. When I did, he placed both hands on it. Then looked directly at me. Promise me something. I nodded immediately. He laughed. At least hear it first. That was the last joke he ever made. Then he explained the rules. Every year. On my birthday. I could open the box exactly once. Inside would be a single envelope. I could read that envelope. And only that envelope. Nothing else. Then I had to close the box. And wait until the next birthday. At first, I thought it sounded ridiculous. Why not just let me read everything? Why make me wait? But Dad wouldn't explain. He just kept smiling. Promise me. So I did. 3 days later. He was gone. The funeral felt like a blur. People everywhere. Flowers. Crying. Adults saying things I barely understood. The only thing I really remember was the box. Because it sat in the corner of my room the entire time. Waiting. My 12th birthday arrived 6 months later. And honestly, I almost didn't open it. Part of me was angry. Angry at Dad for leaving. Angry at the world. Angry at everything. But eventually I opened the lid. Inside were 15 envelopes. Each one labeled with a birthday. All the way to 26. My hands were shaking. I picked up the envelope marked 12. Opened it. And found a single handwritten letter. The first line made me freeze. Because it said something Dad should never have known. Something that hadn't happened yet. Something that would happen 2 weeks later. And that's when I started wondering. How much did my father really know? To be continued. The first line made me freeze. Because it said, by the time you read this, you'll probably be angry at your mother. I immediately frowned. What was that supposed to mean? The rest of the letter wasn't much clearer. Dad talked about growing up. Making mistakes. Learning to forgive people. And then he ended the letter with one sentence. Remember that people can love you and still hurt you. At the time, it felt random. Almost meaningless. So I folded the letter. Closed the box. And tried to move on. 2 weeks later. My mom sat me down at the kitchen table. I still remember the rain hitting the windows. The cup of coffee shaking slightly in her hands. The way she couldn't look me in the eyes. Then she told me she was selling the house. The house my father built. The house I'd grown up in. The house that still smelled like him. I exploded. I was 12. Grieving. Confused. And furious. I accused her of trying to erase him. She cried. I yelled. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely felt angry at my mother. That night I remembered the letter. Word for word. My stomach dropped. Dad had known. Or somehow guessed. And suddenly the box felt different. Not like a memory. Like a message. An entire year passed. Then my 13th birthday arrived. This time I ran to the box. I didn't hesitate. I opened the envelope marked 13. Inside was another handwritten note. The first sentence made me laugh. Because it sounded impossible. You're about to meet someone who will become your best friend. I rolled my eyes. There was no way Dad could know that. No chance. Then, 3 days later. A new kid transferred into my school. And within a month. We were inseparable. Video games. Sports. Late-night phone calls. Everything. For years, he became the closest friend I'd ever have. The prediction was right. Again. Now I wasn't curious anymore. I was obsessed. Every birthday became an event. Every envelope became a mystery. Every year Dad somehow seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear. When I turned 16. One letter warned me not to make a decision out of pride. 3 months later, I almost quit the soccer team after a huge argument with my coach. The letter stopped me. When I turned 17. Another letter told me not to let one bad day convince me my future was ruined. A week later, I failed the most important exam of my life. Again. The letter felt written specifically for that moment. And that's when I started wondering something terrifying. What if these weren't guesses? What if Dad knew something I didn't? Then my 18th birthday arrived. And the letter inside changed everything. Because for the first time, it didn't talk about my future. It talked about a secret. A secret my father had kept from me my entire life. To be continued. The letter for my 18th birthday felt different. Every envelope before that had talked about my future. This one talked about my past. I remember staring at it for a long time before opening it. Because by then, the box had become something special. Every year, Dad somehow managed to say exactly what I needed to hear. And honestly, I was scared of what this one might say. Eventually I unfolded the letter. The first sentence immediately caught my attention. If you're reading this, then you're finally old enough to know the truth. My heart started racing. What truth? The next paragraph hit even harder. There was a time when your mother almost left me. I stopped reading. Not because I didn't understand. Because I couldn't believe it. My parents had always seemed perfect together. At least in my memories. Sure, they argued sometimes. Everybody does. But leave? That didn't fit the picture I'd carried my entire life. I kept reading. Dad explained that several years before I was born, their marriage nearly ended. Money problems. Stress. Fear. The kind of things that quietly destroy relationships. For months they barely spoke. Some nights they slept in separate rooms. Some days they weren't sure if they'd make it another week. Then something changed. Not overnight. Not magically. They simply decided to keep trying. One day at a time. One conversation at a time. One small act of forgiveness at a time. Near the end of the letter, Dad wrote something I still remember word for word. Strong families aren't built by perfect people. They're built by people who choose each other again and again. I sat there for a long time. Thinking about everything. Because for the first time, my parents felt human. Not heroes. Not movie characters. Just two people trying their best. Then I flipped the page. And that's when things got strange. Because there was a second note attached. A note Dad clearly added later. The handwriting looked shakier. Like he'd written it when he was much sicker. The message was short. Only 3 lines. If your mother hasn't told you the truth yet, I hope she does soon. She deserves forgiveness too. I read those lines 3 times. Maybe 4. My stomach felt heavy. Because suddenly this wasn't about an old marriage problem anymore. There was something else. Something my mother had never told me. That night I couldn't sleep. The note kept replaying in my head. She deserves forgiveness too. For what? What had she done? The next morning, I drove to my mom's house. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sure what I felt. I just needed answers. When she opened the door, she immediately noticed something was wrong. You read the letter. It wasn't a question. She already knew. I nodded. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me all night. What haven't you told me? For a moment, I thought she might deny everything. Instead, she started crying. Not loud crying. The kind of crying that comes from carrying something for years. Something heavy. Something painful. Then she whispered a sentence that changed the way I saw my entire childhood. The doctors never thought you'd survive. I froze. What? She looked down at the floor. And slowly began telling me a story I'd never heard before. A story about hospital rooms. Emergency surgeries. And a decision she made that she'd regretted for almost 2 decades. A decision my father never wanted me to know about. And when I finally learned what happened, I understood why he'd waited until now to tell me. To be continued. The doctors never thought you'd survive. Those words stayed in my head. Even as my mother sat across from me. Even as she wiped away tears. Even as she tried to find the right words. Because nothing about my childhood suggested that. I wasn't born sick. At least not that I knew of. I'd played sports. Gone to school. Lived a normal life. So what was she talking about? My mother took a deep breath. Then she started telling me a story I'd never heard before. Apparently, when I was born, everything went wrong. What should have been the happiest day of my parents' lives became their worst. There were complications. Serious complications. Within hours, doctors realized something wasn't right. I was rushed into intensive care. Machines everywhere. Doctors running in and out. Nobody knew what would happen. My parents spent days sitting beside a hospital bed. Waiting. Hoping. Praying. And according to my mother, there were moments when the doctors prepared them for the worst. Moments when they genuinely believed they might lose me. I couldn't even imagine it. Then she told me the part she'd never forgiven herself for. After weeks of stress. Weeks without sleep. Weeks of fear. She broke. Completely. One night she told my father something she regretted almost immediately. She said she couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't watch me suffer. Couldn't keep living in hospitals. Couldn't handle the uncertainty. For a moment. She wanted to walk away from everything. Not because she didn't love me. Because she was terrified. Terrified people sometimes say things they don't mean. And according to her, my father never forgot that night. But he never held it against her either. Instead, he sat beside her. Held her hand. And reminded her of something. Fear doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. By the time she finished telling me this, we were both crying. Not because of what happened. Because of what almost happened. Because if my father had judged her for her worst moment, our family might never have survived it. Then my mother stood up. Walked to a hallway closet. And brought back an old cardboard box. I immediately recognized it. It was filled with photographs. Hundreds of them. Hospital photos. Photos I'd never seen before. Tiny blankets. Tiny hospital bracelets. Machines. Wires. Doctors. And in every single picture, my father was there. Smiling. Even when everyone else looked exhausted. Even when everyone else looked scared. There was one photo that completely broke me. In it, my father was asleep in a chair beside my hospital bed. His arms stretched through the railing. Holding my tiny hand. My mother pointed at the photo. Then she told me something I'd never known. For 43 straight nights. He refused to leave the hospital. 43 nights. I stared at the picture. Trying to process that. Trying to imagine that level of love. Then my mother said something else. Something that made everything click. The box wasn't for you. I looked up. What? She smiled through her tears. The letters weren't really about predicting your future. They were for him. I frowned. For him. What did that even mean? Then she explained. Every time my father got bad news about his illness, he would write another letter. Not because he knew what would happen, but because writing to me gave him hope. It helped him believe he'd still be part of my life somehow. The letters weren't predictions. They were love. Saved for later. And suddenly, I realized something. There was still one envelope left. The final envelope. The one marked 26. The last letter my father would ever write. And according to my mother, it contained something he'd spent years trying to say. Something he could never bring himself to write until the very end. I drove home with the box beside me. my hands shaking the entire way. Because after 15 years, I was finally about to read my father's last message. And nothing could have prepared me for what was inside. To be continued. I stared at the envelope for almost an hour. The one marked. The final letter. The last thing my father would ever say to me. For 15 years, that envelope had been waiting. Through birthdays. Through graduations. Through heartbreaks. Through mistakes. And now it was finally time. Honestly, I wasn't ready. Part of me wanted to leave it sealed forever. Because as long as it stayed closed, a small part of my father was still waiting for me. But eventually, I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. No extra pages. No secret documents. Just one letter. The handwriting looked weaker than the others. Like it had taken everything he had left to write it. I took a deep breath. Then I started reading. My son. That's all the first line said. And somehow, I was already crying. The letter continued. If you're reading this, then you've officially become older than I ever got the chance to be. I stopped. Read the sentence again. Because I'd never thought about it before. For the first time in my life, I was older than my father. The realization hit me like a truck. Then I kept reading. Dad wrote about all the birthdays he'd missed. The soccer games. The graduations. The first job. The first apartment. The first heartbreak. All the moments he wished he could have seen. Then he wrote something I'll never forget. I spent years trying to predict what kind of man you would become. And then I realized something. I didn't need to. Because whether you're successful or struggling, confident or scared, married or alone, you were already enough. I couldn't see clearly anymore. The tears wouldn't stop. But I kept reading. Near the bottom of the page, there was one final story. Dad talked about the hospital. The nights nobody thought I'd make it. The fear. The uncertainty. Then he admitted something. Something he'd never told anyone. Every night after everyone left, he'd make the same promise. Not to the doctors. Not to my mother. To me. A tiny baby who couldn't even understand him. He'd sit beside my bed. Hold my hand. And promise that if I survived, he would spend the rest of his life making sure I knew I was loved. Then came the sentence that broke me. I didn't get as much time as I wanted. But I hope this box helped me keep that promise. I completely lost it. Not because I was sad. Because suddenly I understood. The box was never about predictions. It was never about secrets. It was never about the future. It was a father refusing to let death have the final word. A father trying to stay present long after he was gone. I sat there for hours. Reading every letter again. The same letters I'd spent 15 years opening one at a time. Only now, I understood them differently. They weren't instructions. They were conversations. And somehow, after all those years, it felt like we'd just had our last one. A few months later, I did something I never expected. I became a father. The day my daughter was born, I found myself sitting beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep. And suddenly, I understood my father better than I ever had. The fear. The hope. The overwhelming love. All of it. That night, after everyone left, I started writing. Just one page. Then another. And another. Not because I was sick. Not because I expected to leave. But because I'd learned something from my father. Life isn't guaranteed. And some things are too important to leave unsaid. Today, those pages sit in a wooden box in my closet. My daughter doesn't know about them yet. One day she will. Hopefully many, many years from now. And if she ever reads them, I hope she feels what I felt. Not sadness. Not loss. Love. Because at the end of the day, that's all my father was really trying to leave behind. And somehow, 15 years later, he succeeded. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe and follow for more emotional Reddit stories and unforgettable confessions. One story can stay with you forever. Now I'm curious. If you could receive one final letter from someone you've lost, what would you want it to say? Let me know in the comments.